A lot of people have been asking for gear videos, so here we go. I have an old EMU E4 Classic, which was the first of the 3 generations in the EMU E4 line. Now, this one specifically came out in 1994, and it's what Photek used in some of his tracks around 94, 95. Dudes love the Ultras, but the Classics are where it's at. Before we get started, I have a floppy/hard drive replacement solution called a Zuluscsi, and this was also previously known as SCSI to SD. Now, what this does is essentially tricks the EMU into thinking an SD card is one or many SCSI hard drives. However, there is one thing you may run into depending on how old your sampler is. So while we have these modern storage options like Zuluscsi and SCSI to SD, the problem with older samplers is that they use proprietary file systems. So if you were to take that SD card out of the EMU and put it in your computer, you're just going to see IMG or HDA files and not the individual samples, presets, and banks that actually exist within that IMG file. Now, luckily, there are some tools available today that can help integrate this old technology with newer technology, and I'm going to show you guys how I personally do things running my E4 Classic with my MacBook M1. So right here, I'm just auditioning some drum break samples that are in my EMU, and let's say I want to get those into my computer so that I can process them. And so I take that SD card out, put it in my computer, but as I mentioned earlier, these are in these .hda files. And each HDA basically emulates a SCSI hard drive. So to access the content on those actual images, I use this software here called Translator, which lets me then go into that SD card, and there are my 2 individual quote-unquote hard drives, and then there's everything within there. So the folders, the presets I've created in the EMU, the samples that I've recorded in that EMU as well. And so Translator helps me access those images on proprietary file systems, and then I can just drag that bank out of Translator onto my computer's desktop. I can do a ton of other cool stuff with Translator, like translate to different systems, but in this one we want to keep it in that EMU E4 format. Now I need a way to open this bank, and that's where I go into my Windows VM. And if you have a Windows computer, you can just do this on Windows. And I'm going to use a software called Emulator X3. Now, this is basically the EOS system and functionality in a desktop application, where I can actually open these EMU banks in the software, and I have the same layout. So all my samples, my presets, I can basically do what I can do on my EMU sampler on my computer. Now, Ackeyes, I don't know if they have something similar to this software, so this is unique to the EMUs, but this just makes your life so much easier in that I can come in and build out a preset on my computer with a keyboard and a mouse with a much bigger screen. I can access all of my samples that I sampled directly into the EMU. Right here, I'm creating a preset and assigning that break to a voice, and then setting the key zone for that break where I want it to trigger. And this is so much easier to do on a computer. And so this is a big reason why you would even follow a workflow like this. And here I'm creating another voice to assign a different chop of the drum break. Now, could I do this on my EMU sampler? Like, yeah, sure. It's not terribly difficult. It would just simply take longer. And so this process here just makes it easier if I dedicate a day, and here I am just copying a sample and changing the start point on it. Again, something that would probably take a minute in the EMU, done in 5 seconds here. I sometimes dedicate a couple hours to sampling into the EMU, taking the SD card into my computer, and then just building out a bunch of EMU presets. And I have access to everything, right? Like the filters here. You'll see I'm changing the filter, turning off the release, right? I have all my filter types. Again, this is basically the EOS file system functionality in here. So here I am then exporting the bank file out of the software, right? So that bank format is what the EOS tool can recognize. And I'm just comparing the two, right? The one we grabbed out of the EMU and the one we just exported, they're the same file format. And so now I can take that bank I just exported and simply drag it into that HDA file. And you'll see right here, I then have that preset bank that I created in the X3 software. And I can simply take my SD card, put it back into the EMU, and then we'll have access to that bank that we just created. So over on the EMU, we're loading up that bank we created on the computer, and then we're Gucci. Everything's in there. There's the preset we created. If we go into the preset, there are the two voices we created with the different samples. Our filter settings are there. Everything we wanted is there. So this just, again, allows you to cut down on how long it takes you to do things. Could you just operate everything from the front of the sampler? Absolutely, you can 100% do that. But if you're a little crazy, a little cuckoo, you want to gain some efficiencies, this is how I do it. So just to recap here, in terms of what you need is you need a copy of Translator. The most recent version, I think, is version 7. You can get it from Chicken Sys. You need a copy of Emulator X3 and a Windows computer or VM to run it. X3 is a little more difficult to find. You're not going to find it new, so you're going to have to do some hunting, wink, wink. And then you're going to want a Zuluscsi or SCSI to SD solution. And finally, recapping here, this overview is specific for the EMU Classic first gen or second gen samplers that use that proprietary file system. Some samplers have a DOS compliant file system. So that's going to be your EMU Ultras or like an Akai S5000, 6000. And that's an instance where you could just plug the SD card in your computer and access those WAV files directly. And you could essentially then bypass that translator component of the workflow. But again, that's only if you have a DOS compliant sampler, which you shouldn't. You should get a Gen 1 or 2 EMU. They sound better. The final thing I want to add here too, the most important thing is if you're gonna invest in an old sampler, sample into the sampler. I'd argue 90% of the sound with these things comes from sampling in those sample inputs hot. And then once you have them sampled in, you get those characteristics, then put it on the SD card, then put it in your computer, then process it, and then put it back into the EMU. Anyways, hope you guys found this video insightful or useful. I know old school hardware samplers are kind of getting very popular since the lockdown. So I've been very fortunate to be able to get a few, spend a lot of time with them. And yeah, you guys have any questions? Let me know down in the comments. Peace out.